A couple of weeks ago, we asked you to be praying for Sarah's mom because she was having surgery, and then we also asked you to pray for Sarah because she was traveling to Dauphin. But as we were doing those things, which were right and good to do, I was thinking maybe you need to pray for me and Megan because we were getting left at home all by ourselves. Well, actually, Megan would probably be okay. Megan's on her own by herself, that's fine. But me by myself is not necessarily a good thing. There's a reason why we don't invite people over for supper when I'm the cook. There's just a reason for that. And Sarah does a lot of things that I just don't much think about when she's around, right? So I don't think about what's for supper because she makes supper, and I don't think much about cleaning the house because the house is always clean somehow, you know? And I don't think much about laundry when Sarah's around. But when Sarah wasn't around, I had to think about these things. And so one day I'm throwing laundry from the washing machine into the dryer, and I hit the button on my dryer, and my dryer makes a bunch of noise, but nothing starts tumbling. Nothing moves. So I open the door and hold the switch and hit the button again. Sure enough, it's going, but the clothes are just sitting there. They're not tumbling. So I go out to the garage and I pull all of this tools apart, come inside, pull my whole dryer apart, and I spread the dryer all over our basement. I had parts all over. I had two sides and a back left. That's all that was left of the dryer. It was just everywhere, all kinds of pieces. And what I found out was that I had broken one of these things. This is the drive pulley on the motor that drives the belt that turns the tumbler that makes your clothes roll around in your dryer. That pulley had blown up into a million pieces. And so I called the Estevan appliance guy and asked Sean if he had a pulley like this, and he said no. And I looked all over the place, and no one supplied the pulley for our dryer. 2 or 3 days later, Sean calls back and says, I don't have your pulley, but I have one that's similar to it. You can come and get it and try it and see if it works. So I went and got it, and I put it on my machine, and unfortunately, you see that little bell part to the right? The little bell part on the one that he gave me was too long. In fact, I actually had to cut it. If you see on that picture where that 27 is, I needed to cut down that drive pulley. I needed to cut it right where that 27 was. It was that much too long. So when I took it home, I got thinking, well, what am I going to cut this with? My first thought was I could just put it on the grinder, and I could grind away the metal that needed to be ground away, and then it would be the right distance, and it would be fine, and I could put it on my dryer, and it would be good. But I thought, well, grinding's kind of rough, and this is just a little chunk of aluminum. It might not be very good for it, so I didn't want to grind it. I got thinking I could take a Dremel tool, and I could put a cutting wheel on it, and I could zzz and cut it apart. But I thought, maybe that's not the way to do it either. So what I did, I ended up going and getting my hacksaw. And I carefully and slowly and very gently hacksawed the end off of that pulley so that it would go on my dryer and work properly. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Well, we've got like 7 baskets of clothes in the car. We need somewhere to dry them today, so... No, you don't believe that? Okay. I actually did get my dryer put back together, but as I was doing it, I was thinking about the fact that the proper tool is really important. Right? The proper tool is really important. The hacksaw was actually the tool I needed to go and cut that thing apart. If I'd used anything else, it would have been too rough. It wouldn't have made a nice cut. It wouldn't have worked out properly. I've got lots of other tools in my garage, but none of them would have been the right thing for that job, right? A hammer is a good tool, but a hammer wouldn't have been a good tool for that job. A shovel is a good tool. It's not going to help you here. You've got to have the right tool for the job you're doing. I have seen over the years lots of churches try and solve their problem with the wrong tool. I've seen lots of churches say, you know what, we need to start growing. And what we need to start growing is, and make your list. I think what we need to start growing is a new preacher. If we just fire the preacher we have and get a new preacher, then we'll start growing. That'll be the tool we need. We need a better preacher. Or some some groups say, you know what we need? We need to fire our preacher and have no preacher. That's our problem. We've got a preacher. Shouldn't have a preacher. Everybody should be teaching. That's what we should do. We're going to start growing if we fire the preacher and everybody preaches. I've seen some people say, you know what we need to do if we want to start growing? We got to put on a better show. We got to put on a better show. People got to be excited about coming. So we've got to have funnier things and better things and bigger things. And we've got to have lights flashing everywhere. And we got to put on a show. That's what's going to make us grow. That's the tool we need. I've seen other people say, you know what we need to start growing? We need no show. We need to get rid of the show. We need to make it really simple. We need to make it really quiet. We just have nothing. Just the bare essentials. That's what we need. John and Margaret are coming in. That's beautiful. That's what we need. We just need nothing. We need the simplest thing ever. That's what will make us grow. I've heard some people say, if we're going to grow, you know what we need? We need a better building. Let's build a bigger building, and then when we build a bigger, nicer building, everybody will flow to it. I've heard other people say, you know what we need to do? We need to sell our building. If we sell our building and meet in our homes, then it'll feel comfortable and it'll feel quiet and it'll feel really, really secure, and everybody will come if we meet in our homes and have home church. I've seen churches do 1,000 different things trying to get people to listen. I've seen people using all kinds of tools. You know what we need? We need a radio program. No, we need a TV program. No. You know what we need? We need tracts. If we just had tracts we could hand to people. Didn't have to talk to them. We could just give them something to read. What if we do a mass mail out? Let's just mail stuff out to people. Then they get it and we don't have to do anything. Somewhere, somebody's going to listen to that. You've been down that road too, right? You've heard all those things. Every single one of those things you've heard at some point probably. When somebody's trying to figure out how to make the church work, those are the tools we start to grab. And here's what I want to tell you. While some of those things might work some of the time, none of those things are the right tool. None of those things are going to consistently get you what you want. None of those things are going to work. It'd be like taking a hammer to that drive pulley to try and cut it apart. You're just doing something, but you're not doing anything good. None of those tools are the tools the church needs. How do I know? Because the church essentially has been given one tool. One thing we can supply. One thing that we need to do. One thing that we are asked by God to do in His church that He will not do for us. I believe that God will sustain His church. I believe this is His church. I believe God is working in His church. I believe His word convinces people. I believe people are influenced by God constantly. God says nothing is going to prevail against my church. It'll last till the end. God is in charge. Any good thing that happens comes because God is working through us. But there's still one thing, one tool only you can provide. And that's the thing I want to encourage you to think about providing today. In Acts chapter 16, the Apostle Paul is out on a journey. He's out teaching a bunch of people. It's what we call the second missionary journey. It's the second time Paul and his companions have gone out to teach the gospel all over the place where it hasn't been taught yet. One of the places that he goes is a little town by the name of Lystra. If you see the middle of the Mediterranean there, the word Lystra is there next to Derbe. Paul and his companions go to the towns of Derbe and Lystra. And when they get to Lystra, they meet a young man by the name of Timothy. Timothy is a young man that everyone speaks very highly of. The church loves Timothy, thinks he's a great young guy. Probably about 15 years old at the time Paul meets him. And Paul is told that Timothy's such a nice young guy. His mom and his grandmother are believers. His dad is not. And so he's been raised by his maternal side to be a believer too. And he's a good kid. In fact, they brag about him so much that Paul decides that I'm going to take Timothy with me. He can be helpful to me. He can be useful as we go and try and teach other people. And so for the next 15 years, Paul and Timothy travel around teaching people, writing letters to places, going around and instructing and helping churches learn about God. When Timothy's about 30 years old, Paul drops him off in the town of Ephesus, which is right on the left-hand side of that map there. Ephesus is one of the leading cities in the area. Ephesus is a really important place, and a church has been established in Ephesus. And so Paul drops Timothy off there, and he says, Timothy, I want you to help this church grow. I want you to teach them, and I want you to instruct them, and I want you to help them become more like Christ. Because if we can get a church growing here, then the people who are here will go out to other places. Ephesus was a trade center, and that message will then spread. Timothy, this is a really important job. I'm leaving you here. Timothy has a problem, though. Timothy's only 30 years old. In our language, that doesn't sound all that young. You would be considered an adult for a lot of years when you're 30 years old, right? Legally, at least 18 is our age of adulting in most cases. But in that day and time, 30 was still a young man. 30 was still not someone you would listen to. 30 is a kid. 30 is someone who has no authority. And Timothy is 30. So the Apostle Paul writes to him and says, Timothy, you've got this huge job of great importance with these people, and you have no real authority to do anything. No one's going to listen to you because of who you are. But Timothy, you've got one tool. You've got one thing. One thing that'll influence people. One thing that'll help. One thing that'll make a difference. It is the exact same thing that you have. And it is the only thing we ever have. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12. Command and teach these things, says verse 11. Do not let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers. The only tool Timothy has, the only thing he can do, the only option he's got, the only card he can play is this. Timothy, you are going to be an example. You're going to show them what it looks like. That's what you can do. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment, that being an example is much more important than we think it is. We sort of pass that off and say, yeah, whatever. But being an example is so important. It is important because this is how most people learn anything. It is by watching someone else. You grew up, probably, as I look around the room, I think this is true, you grew up speaking English. Why did you grow up speaking English? Because everyone else around you spoke English. If you grew up in an Italian home, or a Hungarian home, or a Romanian home, or a home in the Soviet Union, you might have ended up speaking a different language. Your brain wasn't wired to speak English. You just spoke English because as you grew up, you looked around and everybody used these words. So that's the words you ended up learning to use. You learn everything you learn by example. Think about being in school when you did a math problem or you were going to do a whole page of math problems. What did you often get ahead of time before you had to do the slew of math problems? You got an example. Right? Here's an example of how this equation works. Now you go do 6 other ones like this one because you have an example. For those of you who are under the age of, let's pick the age of 65. Actually, I won't even do that. Maybe the old people over 65 do this too. When you want to learn how to do anything these days, I mean just anything. Whether you're learning to bake a cake or fix your car or do drywall or if you want to learn how to do anything these days, where do you go right now? What do you do? YouTube. Right? You go to YouTube. Everybody runs to YouTube and watches a video of how to fix their car, make a cake, do whatever, because we want an example. You learn by watching someone else do it. And so the Apostle Paul writes to Timothy and says, Timothy, I know you don't have much else that you can use. I know you don't have age. I know you don't have experience. I know you don't even have their respect because they think you're a kid. But look at this. You can set them an example. You're going to teach them by showing them. Examples are so important. But there's another reason why he tells them to do this. And that is, very simply, again, this is all he has. This is all he has. And can I tell you this morning? This is all you have too. Think about any situation where you want to influence someone. Maybe it's your kids. Maybe you'd like to get your kids going to church. Maybe it's your best friend. Maybe it's someone at work you'd like to influence. We are always tempted to try and push them into it. We're always tempted to sort of rail on them until they do something about it. We nag them and we talk to them and we get mad and we get upset when they don't do. The only thing you really have is your example. Because here's the thing. The church is a volunteer organization. Right? Like you have no other leverage on anyone. I can't tell Kendall, do this or I'm going to stop paying you when you come to church next week. Because I don't pay Kendall to come to church. Kendall comes to church because he wants to. All I have as leverage is just my example. That's all I've got. And in fact, that's all the church has ever had. We cannot make anyone do anything. All we can do is lead and influence by example. If you have your Bibles open, this isn't a bad thing. This is actually how things get done. This is always the plan. If you want to see something be different, you be the example of it. This is always the way it works. 1 Peter is the place we're going to go just to look at this. We'll come back to 1 Timothy in a moment. But in 1 Peter, this is stated a couple of times. And Peter really likes this idea of just be the example of what you want to see. And so if you have your Bibles open, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. Go there for a second. Actually, not that verse. Let me see. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. That's what I want. Sorry. In this passage, Peter's writing to a group of people who are in a tough spot. They've got a group of people that don't really like them. They're in a city where people don't like Christian people very much. And so there's some of them who are thinking, maybe we need to be more vocal. Maybe we need to be more pushy. Maybe we need to be more... How do we get people to listen to us? In this town where nobody wants to listen to the gospel message. You want to know what Peter tells them? Peter says, be an example. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. Live such good lives among the pagans. Live such good lives among the people who don't want to hear anything about Christianity. Live such good lives among the people who are being resistant to you, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they might see your good deeds. They might see your good deeds and glorify God. So how are you going to get people to listen to God? How are you going to get these people who don't want to hear anything to hear something about what God is like? You're going to show them. You're going to be the example. You're going to live such good lives that they can't ignore it anymore. You're going to be the example. If you drop down just a little bit further, start at chapter 3, he starts talking to specific groups about what they can do to make things better in the church there and where they are. And he writes to a specific group of women. This happens in almost every congregation. Women are spiritual people, much more so than men oftentimes. And so lots of times you'll have women coming to church and their husbands don't. In fact, when I first came here, I met with a group of ladies who wanted to know, how do we get our husbands to come to church? What can we do? What classes can we offer? How can we push them? What can we make them? How can we force them to listen? How do you get your husband to listen? Peter says the answer. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1, wives, in the same way, be submissive to your husbands. Don't get caught on the submissive word. We'll talk about that next week. Jump that bit if it makes you mad. It shouldn't, but don't get caught there. Wives, in the same way, be submissive to your husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives. How are you going to influence your husband? You're going to be an example. You're going to show it to him. You're going to show him why it's important. You're going to show him what it looks like. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1, the Apostle Paul says, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. I will be the example. We must learn this. We must understand this, because this is all we have. We have no other lever to pull. I was at a meeting one time of church leaders, and they were talking about the idea of how to get out and how to teach more people and how do we do this. And someone stood up one time and said, you know what we need to do? We just need to set a number. If we set a number of how many baptisms we want to see, then that's what we'll do. We'll just set a number, make a goal, and go get it. Like it's a business project or something. So you know what we did? We set a number. And you know what happened by the end of the year? Nothing. Not even the guy who said, let's set the number, did anything. Because we were trying to push people into coming rather than showing them something they wanted. All you have is an example. So to Timothy, he says, you know, my young friend, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go there into that church in Ephesus, and you're going to set them an example. But even more specifically than that, he says, I don't want you just to go in there and be a nice guy. I'm not telling you that. That's a good start. But there's lots of nice people. I want you, Timothy, actually to focus on 5 different areas. And this is where this becomes more applicable, because it's one thing for me to say be an example. All of you are examples. You guys are good examples. But there are 5 areas we need to watch. These are outlined to Timothy too. We won't spend a lot of time on them, but they're worth some thought. Write them down. Think about these things. Think about your example in these areas. Timothy, I want you to set an example for the believers in speech. Speech is the very first thing he talks about because I think it's the easiest one to get wrong. It is easy to use our speech incorrectly. The things we talk about are so much more important than what we understand they are. We live in a society where we talk about a lot of things. We've got a lot of information. We share it on social media. We yammer back and forth. You call people you want to talk to just out of the blue. We have a huge responsibility to use our speech properly. We are to set an example in speech because it's so easy to use it incorrectly. It is so easy to gossip. You know what I heard about Sarah the other day? You know what Sarah's doing? Do you think what Sarah's doing is right? All of that stuff is wrong. If you've got a problem with Sarah, you better go talk to Sarah, not me. Gossip is a huge issue, and it's incorrect, and it's not the example that we are setting. In fact, it goes even further that our words, when they become discouraging, are not the example we're supposed to be setting. We are not the discouragers. We're not the ones going around saying, have you heard how bad this is and how terrible that is and how awful that is? We're not here to discourage. I hope you listened in Ron's prayer. Did you hear him? He prayed that those who haven't been able to be together, that the church wouldn't be discouraged. We need more people praying that we wouldn't be discouraged, and we need more people to stop being discouragers. If you're talking about what is bad and negative and awful and terrible and how the church is probably going down the drain and how everything looks like, and I don't know how we're going to pay the bills and I don't know what's going to happen next year, stop it. That is not our example. You're using your speech incorrectly. Timothy set an example for the believers in your speech. Elsewhere, in Ephesians, it says this, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only, underline the word only what is helpful. The only talk that comes out of your mouth should be for what is helpful for building others up. That's a command. According to their needs. I love that too. You've got to know people well enough that you can build them up according to what they need. That's our job. That it may benefit those who listen. It is never our job to discourage each other. Even when we have a dispute, we've got to do it in a way. Even when we disagree, we've got to do it in a way that doesn't discourage someone, but builds them up. Sorts it out well. Timothy set an example for the believers in speech. Timothy set an example for believers in life. I could spend a lot of time on this one, I won't, but let me just say this. You know this one. I can't really even describe this, how you would set an example just in their overall life. I can't even describe this, but you know it. You've seen it. You felt it. If I went around this room right now and had everyone stand up and say to me, tell me someone in whom you think you have seen Jesus living over the years. Tell me someone who just sort of radiates God's love just out of their entire life. Tell me somebody who's been a good example. You could name somebody. I guarantee you, everyone could name something because you've seen it in someone's life. Paul says to Timothy, you be that person for someone else now. You be the person that when someone's looking for an example of what a Christian life looks like, they can say, oh, I know you, I know them, I know that one. 60 years from now, I want my kids to say, oh, remember so-and-so? Weren't they great? Because they've set an example with how they live. You feel that, you know that, you've seen that. Timothy set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love. Love there is the old Greek word. If anybody ever knows a Greek word, this is the only Greek word they know, but the Greek word is agape. Greek has several different words for love. This is the word that means, I am choosing to love you. Set an example in choosing to be loving. This is not the word that says, I love you because I like you. This is not the word that says, I love you because we are similar. This is not the word that says, I love you because you'll give me something. This is the word that says, I love you because I've decided to. And that's a huge difference because that means regardless of what you do now, I'm loving you. Regardless how you treat me, I've decided. I'm going to love you. I'm going to love Larry, and that's it. Done. Larry can do whatever he wants. I'm going to care about Larry. Period. Set that example, Timothy. Do that. Try that. See if that changes something. That's the example he's supposed to give them. And again, that's the example that every one of the church leaders in the New Testament gives. Here's the Apostle Paul writing to the church in Corinth. I love these words. He says, make room in your hearts for us. He's begging them, make room for us in your hearts. I want you to love us like we love you. As I've said before, you have such a place in our hearts that we would live or die with you. I have great confidence in you. I take great pride in you. I'm greatly encouraged. In all my troubles, my joy knows no bounds because I love you so much. I've got a bunch of problems, but when I stop and think about the church in Corinth and my brothers and sisters, I smile. I love you. I'm encouraged by you. You guys are doing so well. I've got you in my heart. Can you say that about one another? That you have each other in each other's hearts? That you really care about each other? You'd really miss somebody if they moved to Red Deer. I have you in my heart. And actually, even after you move to Red Deer, you're still in our hearts, right? Heard that somewhere too. Set an example for them in speech, in life, in love, in faith. Timothy, just show them your faith. That doesn't, I don't think that means show them your faith in what you say or how you do those things, but show them your faith just in your loyalty. The word there is more about the idea of loyalty and faithfulness. No matter what comes, Timothy, whether it's hard times or good times, whether things are easy or difficult, you show them your faith. You show them what a faithful person looks like. Isn't that something our world needs right now? Isn't that something our world needs right now? Is a group of Christians saying, I believe God's in charge and it's going to be okay. Things are happening, but I'm not overly worried. It's going to be all right. I have faith. I have hope. Wouldn't somebody benefit from that example today? Show them your faithfulness, regardless of how things go. And lastly, show them an example of purity. Often when we start talking about purity from the Bible, people's minds immediately go to sexual purity. Keep yourself sexually pure, and certainly that would be part of it, I guess. But this word is much more broad than that. This word is the idea that you're going to have integrity. That you're going to be pure. If you buy pure olive oil, it's supposed to be just olive oil with nothing else in it, right? And so that's us, right? We are Christian people with nothing else but Christian in us. So we have integrity. We are purely who we claim to be. So if you see me on Sunday morning, I will act like a Christian and treat you appropriately. If you see me on Tuesday, I'll do the same thing. If I'm playing hockey at noon hockey, I'll act that way. If you see me at the bank, I'll act that way. If I'm paying my taxes, I'll act that way. If I'm getting my car fixed, I'll act that way. I'm never going to change because I'm purely who I'm supposed to be. Set that example. You don't change in terms of where you are. You are always who you are. Someone once said, no one can take your character from you, but you can throw it away. Right? Paul's saying to Timothy, don't throw it away. You set an example of what a Christian looks like in every circumstance, wherever he goes. You're just purely who you are. Timothy, this young man, is going to be okay in this church if he does these things, if he sets these examples, because no one will be able to ignore them. And not only will no one be able to ignore them, but he will be actually leading them to be who they need to be then too. He will be the example that they will then follow. That's all Timothy can do, but it is the most powerful thing he has. I heard a preacher one time not long ago say, when I was at a conference, say, you know what? The church is changing. And I think that's true. When I was growing up, the church on the prairies used to survive by simply having lots of people that moved around a lot, right? People moved from one church to the next. They'd move from Radville to Weyburn to Moose Jaw. And the church would kind of get filled up once in a while by new people who just moved in from somewhere else. And we'd known their families for 100 years. And we just kind of liked the idea that people were just going to keep filling our pews. And we knew their great-grandparents. The families just kind of stuck together. I think time has sort of changed now. Families are smaller. Churches are closed. It's time for us to grow our own food. We can't wait for people to move here anymore. In fact, what we see now is that we're sending people other places all the time. It's not our job to wait for someone else to come and fill our pews. It's our job to go out and grow some food and rejoice with new Christians who come. It's our job to be examples and teach other people. It's our job to make connections to others. It's our job. That's what we're asked to do. We are to set the example. We are to grow our own food. In fact, this is not only important because it's what we get to do, it's our one tool we've got, but it's actually what Jesus did. That's what Christ did, right? Jesus came to this earth to show us what this looks like. He is our example. Follow me as I follow Christ, because I've got that example. We are more Christian when we take this seriously. Because this is the only tool we've got. But it is the most powerful tool we've got as well. So what do you want to do today? How does this apply? What would you do to start? I said you could start this today. I don't know where you're going to start this, but I found this a couple of weeks ago, and I keep thinking about it. This is probably a good start. I have no idea who this guy is, but he says, so what to do? 2 things, it seems to me, at least 2. Use up each day. Fill it to overflowing with good things. Deliberately enjoy it. Go out intentionally and do something. And then number 2, begin now. Mend a fractured friendship. Mail an overdue letter. Repair a broken heart. Lay aside a grievance. Act on a noble impulse. As we all know, the night comes. This guy's saying, you know what? Go out and do something. Be an example. Make something better. Just go out and do the thing you know you ought to be doing. Brothers and sisters, you have been a great example to me. I'm not trying to say you're not. Some of you have been hugely influential in my life just because of the example you have set. There are people in our town who need to see that example too. There are people in this town who, like me, need someone to step into their lives and say, there's another way to do it. Let me show you what it looks like to be loving and encouraging and kind and faithful. Can I show you this? Someone needs your example today. And you will do nothing that's more important this coming week than stepping out intentionally saying, I'm going to be an example for Christ. Can we do that this week? Can we be an example? If you want to take your communion, we will look at that. We will do that next. As I hinted, this is not something else. This is actually the heart and soul of who we are. This is actually the thing that Christians do. This is all we have. This is what we've got. We are an example. And I believe that every week we are called around the table so that we remember the example we were given. I believe we're called around the table so we don't forget what kind of people we're meant to be. The table reminds us that we are people who are shaped by love. We are people who are shaped by grace. We are people who are shaped by kindness and forgiveness. We are people who are shaped by a God who would go beyond what he needed to do what needed to be done. We've been given an example in Christ in the way he lived on this earth, but even more importantly, in the way he sacrificed himself, and then the promise and the reminder that he rose from the dead and went home and is coming back for us. That example is what motivates us as well. So may we think about the example of Christ as we think about being examples. When we think about his example as he sacrificed himself for those who didn't deserve it, you and me. And can we think about how we then need to treat others? Let's pray. Father, thank you for the visible example of your love. Thank you for the visible example of how much you loved us by sending your Son to this earth. Thank you for the reminder that you want us to be your children in ways that we haven't been yet. Father, help us for the reminder that our sins are washed away and forgiven because of his sacrifice. Father, would you bless us as we think about these things today, and would you help us to walk with you in better ways, in your Son's name. Amen. Ron reminded us in his prayer, Lord, thank you that you are the giver of life, not only physical life in this place, but eternal life. Thank you for our forgiveness and our hope of eternal life and a new home with you and with our brothers and sisters. Help us to share that hope of eternal life, new starts, new beginnings, and forgiveness with those who still need to hear it. As we remember our gift, help us to remember the gift that we have to share. In your Son's name. Once again, as always, to those who are following along on video, thank you for watching, and we appreciate that. We hope to see you soon.